Welcome to Finding Danny Lightfoot, the podcast where we explore the mystery of Joe Torres, who played Danny Lightfoot on Nickelodeon's Hey Dude. I'm your host, Luke Pickard, with my longtime friend, John Kimball. Join us as we conduct interviews, explore clues, and celebrate the legacy that was Hey Dude. Yippee-ki-yay, let's go. Welcome to episode 7 of Finding Danny Lightfoot, the podcast. Today is October the 2nd, 2024, and we have a jam-packed episode. We're going to talk about the last episode of Hey Dude, the last lines that Mr. Torres had on the show. We're going to talk about Miss Debi Kalman and how I've been able to get in touch with her about some of this stuff. We're also going to finish up with a big conversation about Splatcon. That's coming up at the end of the month and how excited we are to go and what opportunities we're going to have there. So let's get started. So John, as always, let's remind our listeners what this podcast is about.
Yes, so here on Finding Danny Lightfoot, we are trying to locate the actor Joe Torres, who played Danny Lightfoot on the television series Hey Dude back in the late 80s and early 90s. He hasn't really made any public appearances and hasn't really been seen since. So we're trying to figure out what's going on with him. There have been internet rumors for at least 20 years about where he's been and what he's been up to. And we're trying to run that down. The important thing that we want to say about our show is we're not trying to dox him. If we get in touch with Joe Torres and he does not want to be found, we're going to be very careful about that. We're not going to reveal any information that he wouldn't want to have out there. And as a matter of fact, as we've talked about on recent episodes, we feel very strongly that we are in touch with Joe Torres, albeit through a connection. But we are still holding off on specifics. We're trying not to reveal anything until we confirm that connection up and ideally bring Joe on our show, let him tell his story, let him tell what his experience was like on Hey Dude, let him tell what his life has been like since, in his own words, give his own truth about what his life has been like during and since Hey Dude.
So you told me that you had watched the last episode of Hey Dude, and I'm curious to see what your thoughts were about the show now that we are where we are with the search and we're a little bit older.
Yeah, so a couple of reasons why I thought to do that. Luke and I had decided to record another episode, and so I was thinking about how to get myself worked up into the mood for Finding Danny Lightfoot. And one of the things I thought of was the last episode of the show is kind of like the last footage of Joe Torres, right? This is the last thing we have that's out there that's him.
Unless there's a missing episode.
Well, if there's a missing episode, and then there's the possibility the car salesman, which we talked about previously from New Jersey, vaguely looks like him, but I'm pretty confident is not him. So the last like known footage photo of Joe Torres is this last episode. So I was thinking, you know what, I want to go revisit that. I remembered the capture the flag thing. I'm sure you did too. That was like the basic concept of the episode. But I want to kind of get my mind in the right frame for recording an episode. So I put that on last night, and there are a few things that struck me that I wanted to talk about. And again, we're not a rewatch podcast. There's that show Yay Dude, apparently, that Christina and David talked about on their podcast. That is a rewatch podcast that I've heard is good, and I keep meaning to check out for those that are interested in that. But we are a little bit a nostalgia podcast because this is driven by these memories we have of the show. So for that reason, I wanted to talk a little bit about the last episode, and it's Capture the Flag, the Smelt trophies for the trivia buffs out there. Smelt is the name of the owner of the bar, not who sold it to Mr. Ernst. If anyone ever asks you in a trivia competition.
Question.
But anyway, the Smelt trophy was created for the winner of the Capture the Flag game. Ted, Danny, and Melody, who we know from episode 1, were together the previous summer, had won the Capture the Flag tournament, and they were the red team, and they're very proud of that. And they're talking about with Brad, who's new, Kyle, Jake, and Buddy, who are all new. And they're explaining this to them. And the captain of the winner of the Capture the Flag competition gets to be senior staff the next summer. So that kind of perks their interest, and it perks Brad's interest, particularly because she wants to take that away from Ted, right? There's this rivalry with Ted.
Oh, I remember.
In the summer in which all 5 seasons of Hey Dude take place. But then at the end, they're all sort of Brad and her group are all kind of like, aha, this is a lie. But then at the end, Mr. Ernst says, and then he said something about this capture the flag competition or whatever. So Smelt at least seems to have been honoring the this rule that the captain of the winning team gets to be senior staff. Why they believe that Ernst will honor it, I don't know, because obviously he's against them even having the competition. In fact, he's dealing with this whole sleepwalking thing, which is causing him a lot of problems. He's waking up in the middle of the night and walking around the Bar None Ranch, and at one point opens the cash register and is throwing money everywhere in his sleep. It's the craziest thing, and they have to wake him up with bells, which kind of ties into the plot later. But he's dealing with that, right? And so basically, he's like, no capture the flag, not on my watch. And so they have to do it like undercover. And one thing that struck me throughout this episode, so Ted, Danny, and Melody are a team. They were the team the previous year. And then Brad, Kyle, Jake, and Buddy are a team as well. The Danny and Melody relationship, and I mentioned this earlier, this kind of friendship between Joe Torres and Christine Taylor, which I'm really become interested in. They're on Ted's team, but whenever Ted takes things too far, they're kind of like undercutting him. They're bonding over this thing called Timmy the Magic Shrimp, which was apparently the show that they both watched when they were kids. But there's all these like jokes where it's like basically Danny and Melody interacting and joking around. And Danny in general he's such a more comical character than I remember from the early episodes. So I wonder about that. Was Joe like a funny guy, and that kind of started coming out more and more as the seasons went on? He's always making jokes, and there's like multiple times when he makes a joke at Ted's expense. There's a point where Melody's very angry and threatening to leave the team, and Ted says, Danny, you're still with me, right? And Danny says, yeah, but I don't know why. There's this point where Ted's like, I'm not the biggest jerk in the known universe, right? And Danny's like, in the known universe? No, but maybe the galaxy. The universe is just such a big place. But there's like these jokes that he's making at Ted's expense, and like his character is very humorous. Obviously, because we have the sleepwalking story, we've got the capture the flag story, kind of culminates with this Mr. Ernst sleepwalking into the middle of a capture the flag scenario, and then convincing him that it's a dream. And then I started thinking, like, what's going to be the last thing that Joe Torres said on this show? The last line of dialogue recorded by him. So I started like, kind of like every time he said something near the end, I was like jotting it down. Is that going to be it? There's one point where the game culminates and Ted and Brad both running toward the flagpole with the opposing team's flags and banging heads and knocking themselves unconscious. Mr. Ernst walking into the scene, and Melody making up this lie about how they're sleeping under the stars. Then Danny's like shaking them, being like, wake up, wake up. He even changes it around, says, up, wake, up, wake. I don't know if that was like some kind of joke or whatever, but, and then it ended and it kind of cut away to like the last little segment. Ted and Brad have come back from the hospital and they're talking about what happened. They said there's no sign of concussion. And Danny, again, with this like insulting, like comic humor, he says, did he find any sign of a brain? Like really cutting Ted and Brad down there. Brad even says, Danny, you've changed. You never used to be this mean. I was thinking the same thing. But then I can confirm he hands them the trophy. Danny got the trophy engraved, and they're eagerly looking to see what it says. And it says on the trophy, it says the purple team. And then Danny, the last line he says on the show, that's what you get when you combine red and blue. That's the last thing that Joe Torres said on Hey Dude. And it's a bringing us all together, which is what Danny has been doing all these years later, like compromising and being the voice of reason and everything. So I was happy to see that was how it ended. And then Mr. Ernst falls into a water trough, which is of course like the running comic joke on Hey Dude.
So, was there any indication that that was not going to be the last episode, or that they were going to bring it back for another season?
So a couple of things. As a kid watching this episode, it leads you to believe that there's going to be a next summer, and we're going to go on more, adventures with our friends from the Bar None. As an adult, I listened to Hey Dude, It's the 90s, and they talked a lot about this. It was like there were contract negotiations, and they were like kind of considering bringing in this new cast, which is another thing I was thinking about. As the horseshoe little thing spins around in the opening credits, and you see the actor's name who plays a particular character. I think there's Debi Kalman, Josh Tigel, who played Buddy, David Brisbane, who played Mr. Ernst, Kelly Brown, who played Brad, Christine Taylor, who played Melody, David Lasher, who played Ted, and Joe Torres, who played Danny originally. And then they added Jeffrey Coy, who played Kyle, and Jonathan Galkin, who played Jake. I think those are the only 9. But they were talking about on Hey Dude, It's the 90s, that there was this effort, like they were kind of bringing in new characters and giving them minor parts in the show. And I was kind of watching some of the later episodes trying to figure that out. I need to really go back into it and try to see. It sounds vaguely familiar. Like I remember a couple of people that were kind of like getting lines on the show that weren't our friends, but I want to go back and revisit that. And I was also thinking, like, did anybody else get that spinning around in the horseshoe opening credits? Maybe the dog, actually. Cassie? Did Cassie get it, maybe?
Yeah, I think she might have, some of the later episodes, I think she might have.
But no other
Yeah.
characters, right? I don't think so. But apparently there was like an effort to potentially keep going with the show, but replacing them. I don't know if it was they've gotten too expensive and we need new people or what, but they talked about that on Hey Dude, It's the 90s. Ultimately, we got 5 seasons all over the course of one summer, and it didn't go any further. Nobody knows until this day what happened with Joe Torres. I don't know. It was a pretty good send off because it does kind of leave you like with that feeling that, but it's not going to stop. Even if I'll keep making the show in my head canon or whatever,
Yeah.
it keeps going. There was an next summer, and
Yeah.
Ted and Brad were both senior staff, maybe, I don't know, but it didn't stop.
So another question for you. If they were still filming the show today, what would tomorrow's episode be about?
Man, so I think you've got to have a situation where, well, the Foot Fire podcast is Danny, so I'm going to make him. He's become the central character. He's taken over the Bar None. He has all this knowledge about the West and like how to run a ranch, and now he's the head of the Bar Nine, but he's keeping Mr. Ernst on as like his accountant or something, and the gang is all still together. But
Does he have a love interest?
nah, he just loves the ranch. That's his love interest. He loves the Bar None, and I wonder if Ted and Brad, maybe they're like a divorced couple or something. It feels right.
From each other?
Yeah, like they got married, but it just never worked out. They were arguing too much or something, and they just came back to the place where they were happiest. And Brad's got her family money that she's invested in the ranch, but then Buddy is out after dark. He falls into an abandoned mine shaft. The gang has to go.
Wait, this happens again?
Yeah.
Man.
He's like 45 years old, but he keeps wandering off after dark and getting lost.
And horses to go with them and all that stuff like they did.
Right.
What then when he was going after he was going to he was trying to take the horse away or something?
He really liked the horse and they were going to retire the horse or something. I need to revisit that. I really should just sit down and watch all these episodes again. But I think that would be a lot of fun. It's just hard to find the time these days.
Yeah, because they get out to LA and they start having trivia questions, and we're the ones who don't know anything about it. Man, we're gonna feel like idiots.
Right. We got to
Can't do that.
To win any trivia competition that happens.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is something really exciting. We have been so fortunate to have the chance to speak with Miss Debi Kalman, who played Lucy on Hey Dude. When we first talked to her on the phone, I was very nervous. I mean, this was Lucy, one of the central characters from the show. While we were talking, she told me about this event happening in Los Angeles at the end of October called Splatcon. If you're not familiar, Splatcon is like all of these other big cons, Comic-Con, Dragon-Con, and so on. And Miss Debi told me that she and several of her other Hey Dude co-stars were going to be attending. Now, immediately this grabbed my attention. The idea of all these cast members being under the same roof for the entire weekend is podcast gold for us. We could finally have the chance to talk to them about everything, including the mystery of Joe Torres' disappearance and all the stories that they've shared over the years. If we can even get a couple of minutes with them, that would be incredible for our show and the podcast. So when I got off the phone, I started thinking about the logistics of getting out there, and it was a couple of weeks away. I'm in Nashville. It would be a long flight out to the West Coast, and it just didn't really seem like it was in the cards for me. I told John about it, and it just seemed like maybe it was just going to be too much for us to get out there on such a short notice. So over the next few weeks, I start looking and I see that there's press credentials that we can apply for. And I'm like, well, we're a podcast. Maybe we can get press credentials. I don't know. I mean, probably not. It wouldn't hurt to try. And we might be able to get some access to celebrities that other people can't get access to. Somehow we got approved, which was amazing. So having that additional access for us makes it worth it for us to go. So we're going to go, and we don't really know what amount of access we're going to have or to who we're going to have access to or how long or anything like that, but we feel like it's worth it and it's going to be a lot of fun. So there have been other conferences like this. One in particular called 90s Con started in 2022. And the difference is that Splatcon is specifically related to Nickelodeon as opposed to 90s Con is more against 90s in general. So 90s Con had people like Melissa Joan Hart, David Lasher, Mario Lopez, Kel Mitchell, Joey Lawrence, Candace Cameron Bure, Mark Paul Gosselaar, Danielle Fishel, Andrew Keegan, Nate Richards.
Boy
So
Meets World was Daniel.
yeah. So those things have been happening at least once a year for an entire weekend. There's autograph sessions, Q&A panels, photo ops, and all that sort of stuff. So this is sort of how I feel like this is going to be, photo ops,
Yeah.
Q&A sessions, et cetera, but for the Nickelodeon side. So John's going to tell you guys who's going to be there. But one thing that I thought was important to note is that the Hey Dude group is the predominant group on the Splatcon website. And we're not sure, but we think that's because of all the groups that are going. Their group is the largest intact group of people from the original show that's going to be there. So who else is going to be there, John?
So briefly, Christine Taylor, who played Melody, David Lasher, who played Ted, Josh Tigel, who played Buddy, Debi Kalman, who we've spoken with. She had such a distinctive voice and such a distinctive presence. It was interesting. You told me when you talked to her how immediately you knew you were talking to Debbie, to talking to Lucy. So I thought that was interesting. Kelly Brown, who played Brad, and then Jonathan Galkin and Jeffrey Coy, who were added later, who played Jake and Kyle. The core teen group is there, with the exception of Joe, and then Debbie is kind of there representing the adults. I know David Brisbane appeared at the reunion, but as of now, he's not listed on the Splatcon website as appearing, who played Mr. Ernst, obviously. But setting aside the Hey Dude people, there's a lot of kind of, so Luke and I, our Nickelodeon is like late 80s, early 90s, but there's mid to late 90s too. Kel Mitchell from All That is going to be there. E.G. Daly, who did the voice of Rugrats, and he played Dottie, Luke, in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Kind
Oh,
of like
yeah,
the, I don't
yeah.
want to call it the love interest or whatever, because there was never a romantic thing really, but the female who kind of had romantic feelings for Pee-wee, that's E.G. Daly. And she also did the voice of Tommy Pickles on Rugrats. And so that's why she's going to be at Splatcon. Let's see. I mean, there's people like there's shows that I just don't know. Like there's like Carly, there's all these Power Rangers shows that I know came on kind of after I was out of the Nickelodeon world. I was not watching as many kids shows at that point in my life. But then there's some from our era. There's Michael Bauer, who played Donkey Lips on Salute Your Shorts. Omar Gooding, who is one of the hosts of Wild and Crazy Kids. Venus DeMilo Thomas from Salute Your Shorts. Tully, what was her character's name? She was the very athletic, sports enthusiastic female character on that show. Was it Tully? Do you remember?
Telly. Yeah, we looked it up. I think it was Telly. Telly, I think.
Yeah. Phil Moore, who was the host of Nick Arcade, which, if we ever have to have a sequel podcast to Finding Danny Lightfoot, maybe something about Nick Arcade. I was always fascinated with that show. And Danny Cooksey, who played Budnick on Salute Your Shorts and was also in Terminator 2. The Hey Dude thing is obviously the biggest draw for us, but there are some other people there. I mean, I can't imagine turning a corner and seeing, the guy who played Budnick in front of me, right? I mean, that was another show that I really liked back then. So, I mean, there's potential for so many more. I mean, Pete, you mentioned Melissa Joan Hart from Clarissa Explains It All, but like, all those actors and actresses in that show were so iconic and interesting. I would love to have an opportunity to interact with any of them, and I think there are plenty of other fans who would as
Mark
well. So
Summers.
just that's yeah, Mark Summers. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean that's probably he might even be like if you think of like the face of Nickelodeon. For one, I'm excited to see these people, but for two, and I think the main thing, I'm excited to try to ask some questions about, these cast members who interacted with Joe every day for years to ask them like for their memories and to hear what they think about Joe and how they remember him and what he was like. Because really, we've talked about this before. We don't have a lot to go on. We're kind of outsiders who liked the show. We're basing a lot on how his character was, but we don't know that much about Joe. So to hear firsthand from people that knew him, I'm excited for that for sure. Obviously, I live out here in LA, so it's a little bit easier for me to commit to this, but extremely happy on both a professional level to have my co-host with me, but on a personal level too. It's probably been 5 or 6 years, maybe more. When did you last come out to LA? That maybe
Jeez.
about 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think you're about right.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think
So
about it,
for
but yeah,
that
it's been a
reason
while.
too, bringing the co-hosts and longtime friends back together, I'm excited for that reason as well. So
Well,
this
high
is all
five
good
for
news.
sure.
Yeah.
And one thing I was going to say too is Nickelodeon stars who attended 90s Con: Kel Mitchell, Kenan Thompson, Danny Tamborelli from Pete and Pete, Michael Morona from Pete and Pete, Christine Taylor, David Lasher, Josh Tagel, and Kelly Brown, and then Lori Beth.
It feels so timely as we're on this journey finding Danny Lightfoot for this to happen, a few months in as we've made the progress that we've made. It just feels very poetic, right?
Yeah.
Like this is what we're heading towards.
So this is happening on October the 19th and the 20th. If you guys still want to go, I think you can still get tickets.
Yeah.
And it's at the LA Airport Hilton. So with that said, what are some of the questions that we should ask the cast that would help us in our journey?
Because we basically know where he is, my mind has shifted from where is Joe Torres to who is Joe Torres? What has his life been like in the years since? What is his feeling about Hey Dude? Is there some sort of big emotional feeling toward the show that is keeping him from coming out publicly? Or is it just that he's busy with other stuff? He's got life is going on and it's not important to him. So, like, understanding that and understanding that person. So, what I want to ask most is what's your lasting memory of him? When was the last time you saw him? And what do you carry with you today about Joe that, like, if someone says that name, what's the first thought that comes to your mind? And I just want to hear from these people that had these direct interactions with him because we care so much now. And it started off as fandom and then we've built this podcast and now it feels more like it's our duty, it's our responsibility.
A professional thing to some extent.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I want to ask. But what do you think?
So let me ask you this. Are there any questions that you would ask anyone in particular?
We'll kind of get into this if we talk about the last episode, which I think we are going to talk about a little bit. I kind of want to ask Christine Taylor about her friendship with Joe because she mentioned on their podcast, Hey Dude, the 90s called. She went back to Tucson like a year or so after Hey Dude had ended, and she had lunch with Joe. And that kind of struck me as like, well, she had at least attempted to keep like a, relationship post the show with him. So I do kind of want to ask her about what was her friendship like with Joe. And
I think that's the only contact with Joe that we know that anyone from the show has actually made with him after the show wrapped.
right.
So to answer your question, I think what I would ask them is what compels them to come to events like Splatcon and 90s Con other than money, right? I mean, obviously money is going to compel everybody to some extent, but like, I don't think Christine Taylor needs the money, right? So why is she coming out to this? Is it because of her co-stars? Is it because she loves the fans? Is it because she just has an emotional tie to the show? And I would ask the same thing to people like Josh Tagel and David last year because it would be helpful to us to know what it is that brings them out to these events because that might be something that would appeal to Mr. Torres as well that we could talk to him about.
I think that's great. I think that's a really deep question too. Like, why are you here? I mean, we got to phrase it the right way so it's not insulting, but
And in terms of what I would ask someone specifically, I would say I would probably ask David last year why he ignored my comment about finding Danny Lightfoot because that was going to be a great documentary. I'm just kidding, obviously. I know he's busy and I really don't care. But I might tease him a little bit about it.
What about our listeners? How can they get in touch with us and
Yeah,
send us
that's
some
good.
of their ideas for questions?
That's a good question. So today's the 2nd. I'm probably going to try to get this out tomorrow, the 3rd, or maybe the 4th. But if you guys have any questions that you think maybe we're not going to ask or that we're not thinking about, let us know. Shoot us an email at findingdannylightfoot@gmail.com, because there's a good chance that you might have something that we're not thinking about that would be great to ask, and we would certainly do that and give you credit. We aren't 100% certain that we're going to have any time with them, but we could at least consider it if we do have time.
Yeah, absolutely. Encourage everyone listening to send us questions, because I mean, what an opportunity. We think we're going to be able to ask questions to everyone in the Hey Dude cast except David Brisbane and Joe Torres. So for those of us that are huge fans of the show, that's like a big deal. So
we have some more exciting news that we wanted to share, but we actually have to wait because some of it is still developing. So stick around to the next episode. You will not be disappointed. And of course, as always, if you have any information that would help us along our journey, please email us at findingdannylightfoot@gmail.com. And thank you for listening.